what you're describing as suffering, what I describe as like the hockey dream dissolving out of my hand, out of my grasp, that it's only suffering because I'm clinging to that story or that path. But if you don't cling to anything and you just be in the moment and accept what is happening when it's happening, there's never suffering.
Hello and welcome to Second Order Change, the podcast where we talk about the irreversible process of becoming yourself and stepping into the life of your dreams. I'm your host, Evan Borsier, and today we're going to be talking to Jordan Owens, who is a distant second cousin of mine through details which we won't get into, but who has been an inspiration for me for a long time in my journey. Jordan is someone who has played hockey from a young age and made it all the way to the NHL, which is the peak moment, really, in a hockey player's career. And we dig into the process of getting there, losing it all, and stepping into what life looks like on the other side of everything that you thought you wanted. This is something that I really relate to because I had a similar journey in filmmaking where I started when I was 18, and by the time I was 25, I had a massive amount of what a lot of people would call success. I had Instagram followers, I had 2 Patreons, I had a podcast, I had a blog, I had sponsorships. I was flying around the world getting to shoot big projects for big brands and making more money than I ever thought was possible. And I was miserable. And I ended up walking away from all of it. I call it my come to Jesus moment, and that's a story for another episode. But it was really fun to see Jordan's courage in exploring his own story, his own journey with creativity, with spirituality, with addressing the world in front of him, with accepting other people's perceptions and stepping into your identity and your grounded strength inside of that. So we're going to get right into this episode. I just wanted to tell you that one of the most important things you can possibly do is tell someone about this show. These conversations are not in any particular niche, and that, to be totally honest, is part of why I stopped doing them for a long time. I had a few meetings with brand experts who said that we needed to pick whether it was an art podcast or a sports podcast or an entrepreneurship podcast. And my personal experience and belief is that the reality of becoming all of who you want to be and all of who you were made to be is that you have to accept the reality that you are all of those things. You are an artist, you are an entrepreneur, you are an athlete. And so these conversations are a facilitation of us really exploring that, the multimodal way of being where you are expressing every aspect of yourself. And a big part of that is reintegrating the aspects of yourself that people may have talked you into leaving behind at some point. So that being said, we don't necessarily have the algorithm on our side, but we do have you on our side. So if you find any of these episodes helpful, 1, please tell a friend. 2, please tell the guest. I mean, you can tell me too, and I would love that, but I think it would be super meaningful to Jordan to hear how impactful his story is to all of you listening. So you can find him on Instagram. We'll have the link down below, and shoot him a DM and just tell him something that meant something to you, because this is another thing in the world of social media and content that it can feel like we're shoveling things into a void. Maybe you've felt that, I've felt that. And something that I have personally had to hold myself accountable to stepping back into is being that voice, being the voice that leaves a comment, being the voice that encourages somebody, being the voice that says, hey, thank you for putting the time into that podcast, because I know it's a lot of work and you don't always get all the feedback that you wish you did out of it. So tell a friend, let a guest know. And past that, I'm going to let you get right into this conversation with Jordan as he talks about the journey of becoming himself and living his dreams.
Yeah, headphones are on my list of things that are wants but not needs. But I'm going to pull the trigger like coming up soon, I think. Maybe boxing.
Are you looking for something specific?
I want something that goes over my ear that sounds like just crispy. I'm not so keen on, like, I don't need them to be noise canceling, but it's a nice plus. I'm more concerned with just like premium sound just for editing or even just leisure, like listening to music. Like these are good. These are actually, they're old. They're from 2014, Sennheiser. Okay. This was a gift from the team owner of the Montreal Canadiens. I was with the Hamilton at the time. And so Montreal's affiliated with Hamilton, the American Hockey League, and this was the team gift for Christmas. It was funny. His name is Michael Anlauer. So he came to our was a game like right around Christmas, and he was in the locker room after the game, and I went up to him. I'm like, "Hey, Mr. Anlauer, like, thanks a lot for the headphones. Like, they're really great." And he's like, "What headphones?" I'm like, "The gift." He's like, "Oh, is that what I got you?" So he had
Classic.
somebody like his assistant or something just pick the gift for the team. But
Yeah.
yeah, still
Yeah,
holding
yeah.
up.
Is that typical? Like, did you tend to get holiday gifts from teams?
Yeah, but they varied. They varied in quality. I think in junior, that was the first time I got like a pretty cool gift. It was an iPod Shuffle. I
Okay.
didn't, I don't know, any Apple product. I'm like, okay, that's nice. I ended up
Yeah.
giving it to my girlfriend at the time. Um, yeah, other teams, that was probably the best gift we got was headphones. And that's, I don't know. It's okay. I'm not complaining about it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
they could.
gifts are hit or miss. I did a podcast with this guy John Rulin, who he runs like a gifting agency. That's their whole thing is they do a lot of like VIP campaigns for like sports teams and stuff. But he has all his like rules of good gifts and bad gifts and things to avoid. And he has a book called Giftology that I read a few years ago that was super helpful for me personally, actually, but also helpful on the professional side. Uh, I've come to find that I've never thought of myself as like a gift person. People have like the love languages conversation or whatever, but I do. There's something really special to me about like being able to get people things is a weirdly fulfilling thing for me. So even like crew gifts and stuff, I've loved trying to go like, what are the cool little things you can do to make things memorable? Are you a gift person? Do the holidays excite you, make you nervous?
Mm,
You a full blown anti gift person?
I love thoughtful gifts. Like I love when someone gives you a gift it fits so perfectly, like a puzzle
Mm-hmm.
piece. You're just like, man, that is so thoughtful, you know? But I hate, it's a strong word, but I'm gonna use it anyway. What Christmas has become, like I feel like it's December 23rd and I'm running around like I just need to check this box. What can I get this person?
Right.
It's like, will work. But they're gonna know like I put zero thought into this, but like, I have to get them
Yeah.
something. I don't like that at all. I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
I'd rather someone just not get me a gift than get me something that like I'm gonna immediately throw out or give away or like if anything, get me like a stick of deodorant or like some quality socks, like that stuff I
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
hate to buy, but
Well,
you need.
that's one of the Rulin tips that I think is like it's super simple, but it's so practical. It's like whatever your budget is, just go top of class in whatever the thing is. So he's like, you're better off buying like a $50 mug than like a $50 watch. Because no one buys $50 mugs for themselves, but like if it's a
Mhm.
watch person, a $50 watch, it's like whatever. But yeah, like I've even been like a like nice soap, like it can be anything. But to your point, it's like just something that feels like, oh, this is cool and experiential.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. But we've sort of gone that way too. Like even with our immediate family, we started this a few years ago, but we have not always done, just to be clear, but we've done no gifts and we'll just all go do something together. So like there's this place nearby that's like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's called Level 99, but it's like all these little rooms and they're not like escape rooms, but they're like challenge rooms. So it's everything from like puzzles to like Legends of the Hidden Temple type stuff to like obstacle courses. But it's a cool setup. You go and get a wristband, and so you all get like buzzed into the room, and there's like leaderboards, and it's a fun way to
Mhm,
spend an
mhm, mhm.
afternoon. But I think we were all of that like. No one likes trying to like awkwardly find tchotchkes for their family. It's like, let's just go do something fun and call it even instead and
Yeah.
save the couple $100 of nonsense that's going to hit the trash.
Yeah, yeah, for real. And those it's a escape room, right? What you're describing?
It's sort of like an escape room. It's not exactly, but it's in that world.
Okay. Yeah, those I haven't done one of those. I'm afraid to do one because I feel like it will be really humiliating to not get out. Like I have this fear like, oh, you were just too dumb to escape the escape room. So I'm just going to avoid them.
You do fine. Um, it was funny. Okay, so you brought up hockey, and I was like just taking down some notes. I was like, what are interesting conversations? Because we have so many things that I feel like we could talk about, and it brought up something that's immediately a curiosity point for me. Which I think is interesting in the context of our relationship because it's funny that we're related because we don't look related, obviously, but we're sort of like second cousins because we share grandparents. Your grandma and my grandpa are siblings.
Right.
You're on the more authentically, consistently Canadian side, where my family fled south for the winter, and so I was curious, I guess, just like your experience being, um, you know, not white and being in like playing hockey, just like that whole environment. I guess I'm just sort of
Mhm.
curious about that experience, which I feel like is maybe a heavy thing to jump right in on. But I was just thinking about the elephant in the room with our relationship. And then you brought up hockey and I was like, man, that's such a curious world for me. So like, what's that been like in your life?
Yeah. Okay. So before we go there, I just want to say thank you because we've been talking a little bit, but I haven't thanked you for one client that I have that is probably my most high profile client that I have to date, like bragging rights type of client. It was because of you. And our relationship, like we have always been cool, but we were separated we're a few years apart, right? So when you're younger, that's more of a big deal. But now as we're older, it's less of a deal. So we've been communicating more and definitely vibing together because I think we've taken an interest in self-development. I think that's where we vibe now. But yeah, thank you for the one, hopefully second client I'm going to get thanks to you. So man, thank you so
You're so
much.
welcome.
But yeah, this whole to be honest, I thought of it, but I never thought of it at the same time. It never bothered me. When I'm on a team, I can look around the room and notice that I was the only black player. And for the record, my dad is from Jamaica. My mom is like a several generation Canadian, I think Irish background. But don't quote me on that. So I'm mixed. But if you saw me walking down the street, you wouldn't say there's a white dude. You would say there's a black dude. So that's how I kind of identify. If you ask me what I am, I'll say black, even though I feel like I don't belong in the black community, but I also more obviously don't belong in the white community, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
as I looked around the locker room on every single team I've ever played on, it's obvious. Yeah, I'm the only black player. There's been struggles. Yeah. Racism, stuff like that. People calling you the names that, everyone knows, the obvious ones. But that never really got me angry. I felt like society would allow me to act out against people who are being racist in a violent way, and that would be totally
Mm-hmm.
accepted. But I always looked at it as the other person's ignorance. It was just,
Mm-hmm.
I would look at them like I would, you know, sort of look at my child in a way like, you poor thing, you don't want to put your jacket on. You know, it's going to be freezing as soon as we go out there, but you'll see, it's, you kind of have this, you feel like you're looking down from a higher place. And I don't mean to sound like conceited in that sense, but anyone who is racist, it's purely ignorance. But
Were you always that way? Like as a kid, did you catch chirps? Like
yeah,
did your parents come and say like, hey, people are just ignorant? Or like what was that? Where did that seed of having that perspective and not taking it as a reflection on yourself or anything else come from?
I don't know. I think it's maybe just I don't want to say personality, but like my temperament. I don't spaz out and get super angry and freak out. That's just
Mm,
not who I am. Um, I've, I'm the type of person that finds humor in everything. Like if someone would start to
mm-hmm,
drop N bombs on me, I would probably just laugh. Um, yeah, I don't really take anything seriously at all. But as I progressed through my career, it became, and I feel like especially in today's world, there's a lot of emphasis on that,
mm-hmm,
on race unnecessarily, I think, and this might be a unpopular opinion, but I would never like to have a job because of my ethnicity. I don't want to be the first black player to do this or do that. I think the more we put attention towards that, the more we solidify the the distinction between
mm-hmm,
black and white or whatever colors you want.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you give attention to it, it just stays and grows. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's something I guess that I've struggled with, in this environment is like that feeling of wanting to expand my personal perspective and wanting to understand other people's experiences. But it's also like, to be totally honest, it's like there is always this part of me that's like, I don't love the question of like, what's it like playing hockey and being black? Like it's just not a question that you would ask everyone, but
mhm,
it is like, I don't know, like, how do you feel about that? Like, we have another close friend who we've talked about that he's like, I think he's sort of like, yeah, people should just ask about it less and talk about it less. And it just sort of is what it is. And like, you're sort of perpetuating it by actually instantiating the conversation. But then I feel like there is this other side of like just empathy and seeing different people's perspectives and experiences. And like, I don't know, I feel like to not make it about me, but just to be honest, like it's one of those things that I've felt like it feels like a lose-lose sometimes, that it's like ignoring it feels bad, but also bringing it up feels bad. And
mhm,
so it's like, what's that space, even in the bigger conversation around, say like the stories we're telling, if we're doing a documentary on an athlete, it's like, is this a relevant story point? That's
mhm,
like, there aren't a lot of historical black professional NHL level hockey players. Is that a
mhm,
story
mhm,
that should be told? Or is that more just something like it just is what it is? And we're just gonna, you
mhm.
know, I don't know. I'm not really
Like,
clearly articulating the question, but I
I
guess
know
I'm
what
just
you
sort of
mean.
curious your thoughts on that.
I know exactly what you mean. Yes, it is a story. Like, it's interesting. It's like maybe not so much today, but you rewind the clocks. Like I don't know. I think it was my third or fourth year. I was playing in Grand Rapids for the Red Wings farm team, and I changed my number to number 22. So that was the year that I learned Willie O'Ree's story, and he's the first black hockey player in the NHL. Played for Boston. So to pay tribute to him, I changed my number to 22. And what I went through in minor hockey and then into pro, like at least one incident per season, at least once,
Mm.
there would be something. Somebody would say something.
From players, fans, all of the above.
Players, fans. I've had fans in Europe do monkey chant at me, like pretend they're peeling a banana. Yeah, be chanting things. Yeah, crazy
That's
stuff.
wild.
Yeah, yeah. In today's world, like this wasn't that long ago, you know.
Right.
But what Willie O'Ree went through was another universe. Like, and again, this is an unpopular opinion. There, you might not find another person that thinks this way, but to be a black hockey player right now, it's the best time in history to be a black hockey player, even though
Mm.
there's still kind of few and far in between. To be black in general, this is the best time in history to be a black person, even though there's a lot going on that's deep with systemic racism that exists. Not denying that, but it's better to be black in 2023 going into 2024 than it was 250, 300 years ago.
Mm.
So we have to recognize these things and zoom out and look at it from like the 10,000-foot view, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it
Yeah.
puts things into perspective. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
like to ever look at myself as a victim. I guess that's like
Mm-hmm.
my main worldview and how I kind of solidified like these thoughts, because I've thought about it lots. And any situation you put me in, I refuse to look at myself as a victim.
Mm.
So
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I respect that a lot. So hockey, though, like
mm,
hockey has been such a big part of your life. How did that start? What was the dream? Like pro. You're one of the people who's actually made it as a pro athlete. So how did that? Did you always want to be
mm.
a hockey kid?
Yeah, yeah. Like I don't know how I got into hockey. It was my grandpa. So you'd call him Uncle Bill, I think, right? Is that
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So my grandpa, um, that's the side of the family that played hockey. So they put a stick in my hand, got me on skates for the first time. And like any other Canadian kid, I don't know if this is a culture thing. Like in Canada, if you're like an able-bodied male, like it's like hockey, 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 hockey. I don't know if it's like that in the States or not. Was it like that for you? Was the family like, Evan, you want to play hockey?
Not as much. I mean, there was definitely like, there was the my grandpa side of it, which was definitely like we would go skating, we would go to hockey rinks, we would go pull a net out at the house. I think there's a really old picture of all of us outside grandma's house, like from forever ago, but it was pretty isolated to like him in my life. And that's where like it was a part of my life up until the point that he passed, and then it pretty much went away with that. My anecdotal experience is that like it's a cultural thing here, but I think hockey's kind of in the world of like my perception of it is that it's sort of like lacrosse. It's like a sort of elite thing. You know, it's sort of like a preppier parents who are going to run their kids all over the place and have time and money to do that sport, where like soccer and baseball and whatever else are more sort of the like that's what most people are playing. And so hockey's definitely big, but it's more of like a upper middle class thing than an everyman thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like that's the reality of it. It's definitely an upper middle class thing. Although in Canada, if you're not in that cast, you still will find a way to put your kid in hockey, whether it's through like just playing house league or getting used gear. And there's routes, but it's sort of like this rite of passage in Canada. Yeah. Everyone plays hockey.
I feel like all the winter sports are like that. It's like skiing and everything too. All that stuff's sort of on the expensive side.
Yeah, totally. Well, like if you want to save money, play basketball or like soccer. That's it. Or maybe baseball too. But like I had the stick in my hand from when I was 3-4 years old, and then just played, and I was obsessed with it. Like I was very, very lucky that I found what I love to do a few years after I was born, the thing that I was obsessed at. Because now that I'm finished playing hockey, it's taken, and it's an ongoing process, still trying to find that next thing to become obsessed about, because it's easy to go through life when you're obsessed with something and you have this like purpose. It's very clearly defined. The last 4 years since I retired, it's been extremely tough. It's like, oh my God, how do people go through life like not knowing what they want to do? Like I'm going nuts after 4 years. I couldn't imagine a life of this. But hockey for me was like, minor hockey. I was always the best player on the team or one of the best players on the team. And you play for the select teams, the summer teams, all this stuff. And then comes a time and it's like, okay, you're either going to make hockey part of your life. You're going to keep going. It's a cutoff line, or hockey's done, and you get drafted to junior, and the few players, handful on each team, will keep moving up. And that's just how it went. Every time there was a cutoff, after your 4 years in junior, it's pro or nothing, or pro or university. But I ended up like making the cut. Now I'm in pro, and you just kind of, the hierarchy resets itself. And now it's like, okay, you start in the East Coast League, got to get up to the American League, got to get up to the NHL. Like it's just this hierarchy that just keeps going,
right?
Like all the way up.
Levels and levels. Yeah. Was that like hitting those sort of like inflection points? Were those personal and or like family conversations, or was it just like if we make it, we're going to keep going? Like, was there ever a point where it's like, hey, the ball almost gets put back on you, like, are you going to keep doing this or not? Or was it sort of just momentum that kept going and going?
Honestly, Evan, never, ever thought about not playing hockey. Never crossed my mind one single time that I was not going to be a professional hockey player. Like, not for a single second. And I think that's part of the reason that you get there. And I'm learning now, and I'm seeing now that like, if you set your mind on something and you obsess over it, and you're not taking no for an answer, like it's not a possibility that your goal is not going to happen. You will get it. You will get there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I did, that unconsciously or subconsciously, and just made it. Lucky.
Yeah. I feel like that's very similar to what my experience was, even just like the first 5 or 6 years sort of getting into the film industry. Was like, it was simultaneously like not a super explicit goal, and it was also never a question. It was just like, we're just going that way, and we're just going to keep walking that way and see where it goes. And then it's like, next thing you know, you're in all the places you never maybe thought you would be. But yeah, that like single-minded directional focus, it is incredible, like where it can take you. So what was like, was there a sort of oh wow moment, or just like a I've made it moment, whether that's, I don't know where that would be for you, is that like going AHL, or where's the moment where you're like, oh holy crap, this is a different ball game now?
Yeah, it kept happening. Like once you leave minor hockey, I remember playing junior B as my first time moving away from home at 16. I was talking about it the other day with a friend. I remember my mom like bawling her eyes out in the parking lot, like saying goodbye to her firstborn son. Like, I'm out of the house. That's a really young age to leave home. I know you left pretty early too, but it was the first stage of hockey where you stop paying for your equipment. And that's a big deal. Like, you get everything paid for. Hockey's extremely expensive. And after that, it was, and then into the OHL. Again, you're not paying for everything. The gear gets of a higher quality. There's more fans, there's bigger lights, there's cameras, there's media, there's tracksuits and jackets and buses and free food and all this stuff. And then you get to pro. And for me, it was the American Hockey League. It was in Hartford. And I remember, they fly you out and there's a chauffeur picks you up at the airport and brings you to the hotel, and a nice, really nice, fancy hotel. And, the level of professionalism just keeps increasing all the way to the point after I signed with the Rangers and going to NHL camps and having a taste of that, private jets where you can be reclined with your seatbelt off as the plane lands. Like, no one's telling you to do anything. You could be eating a blueberry parfait as the plane's taking off. There's no rules. Like, all that stuff. The stewardess like telling you to take your headphones off or put your seat up like a millimeter. Like, none of that's happening. And you're just like, I'm here. This is it.
Yeah. That's so cool. It is like, it's a magical experience. I was thinking about that a little bit just today, to be honest. I was on this little rental car fiasco at the Hertz office. And just like, I don't know. I just was reflecting on the very real difference between like just operating at different levels, let's say, like when you go to a like higher end restaurant, and just the service and the information that's given and the care. And, even for me, like being on sets and just having like camera will just disappear. It comes back with fresh batteries. People are bringing you coffee. Like, you're just in the middle of this magical dance. And I would imagine that hockey is similar and even more magical with some of the travel stuff and whatever. And then, I don't know, I sometimes feel like I experience like cognitive dissonance when you get into somewhere that just isn't any of that. And there's just that part of me that just wants to be like, but things can work well. It's like I get this little bit of me that's just like infuriated at clunky systems and experiences, because I personally love those experiences. And I think at least for me, it's like once you've had a taste of that, it's like, life, I don't want to say life is better that way, but it's like, like this is the way I want to be, like with people who operate like this, with this level of intentionality.
Tell me about it though. Like, I want to know about your journey. You pick up your camera. Like, when was the first time that you did a gig where you're like, okay, I've taken a leap. Like, I've unlocked a new era of my evolution.
Yeah. I mean, the first big jump for me was like, I'd been just working at, like a Marshall's, just like a department store here. And I did a wedding for like $200, which I think I spent all the $200 on gear and just like got my brother to come do a second camera. And that wedding somehow ended up in the offices of Massachusetts Maritime Academy, which was a college right around the corner from us, or college, university. I don't know how the terms for these things are confusing. An academy, whatever. But they were like, hey, we want you to come in and do some stuff for us. We want you to do some of these videos of orientation. We really like your work. And I was pretty straight up that I was like, I don't know what I'm doing really. Like I was 18, I think. And thankfully, honestly, it's one of those like angel moments. The lady Angela there, who was like the marketing director, was very much like on my side, I guess you could say. Like, she definitely could have taken advantage of me and didn't. And she was just like, well, the last guy charged us $100 an hour and he was way worse than you. So just start there. And I was like, I just remember walking back to my car and just being like, like, this is totally different than checking out clothes for $9 an hour. And like, this is the beginning. And so I think that was like the first big jump. And then it's just a series of things past that, like we came back and me and my buddy Chris came and did these 2 projects one was for Mass Maritime Academy, one was for a local fish market. And I don't even remember. I want to say that it was like the budget was like $2,000 for each of them. And we just shot like for 5 days, we went back and forth between these 2 projects, barely slept, made all this stuff, put it out. And then they came back and were like, hey, we want you to do more of like this sort of level of work. And they're like, what would you need to do that? And I think the next thing we did was like $8,000. And so it was just like you were hitting these ratcheting points of like, oh, now I can bring more people in. Now I can bring more tools in, and then getting asked to like, hey, can you come DP something and like just write up a list of all the gear you want and it's just going to show up for the most part, starting to be in that world of like, oh, we can spend $1,000 a day on a camera body and $700 a day on lenses and this light and that light. And
how long was that gap from like your first $100 an hour gig to where you can just write whatever you want and get it?
It was, so to be clear, it's not quite right at whatever you want, you get it. There's always still weird like budget limitations, but it was much more like, it wasn't just me and a tripod anymore. It was like, oh, we can actually like pull together pro stuff. But it was pretty quick. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look, but I feel like it was pretty much within the span of like 3 or 4 years that I went from like never having done anything to like working on stuff that I was really proud of and getting a good amount of attention for it. But there was also always this, to be totally honest, I was always in this world of like, I would have the things that were sort of like feeding the machine. So like Mass Maritime Academy was one of those things. And then in the meantime, I was still doing other things. Like I was doing like these music performance videos for, I think we did like 8 of them for $500 once. And it basically all just went to mixing. And so I was so just in the mode of making that you would have these sort of moments of access to the promised land, as it were. And then I would just use that to keep like eating ramen and going and just making whatever I could get my hands on. So it wasn't like this just like hand over fist, endless piles of massive projects. But it was sort of constantly having a finger in that and that thing getting bigger. And then also constantly doing other things that were more just like for myself and fun and R&D type stuff. But I think the biggest thing that I look at in hindsight is like from that first moment, like I quit Marshall's 2 months after I got my first camera and I've never had a real job again. So one way or another, I've just sort of managed to ride it out since then.
Yeah. How much of that journey do you feel like, looking back now, were you in the driver's seat for in terms of the direction that you were going? Because I know you've ended up, and correct me if I'm wrong, like mostly on the commercial side. I know you have a few like narrative style projects that you've done, but like, was that intentional to go to reach like high levels on the commercial side? Have you ever thought about documentary or like, narrative?
Yeah. So I would say that like one thing that I was very intentional about from the beginning was high value on creative, and like, which I feel like is sort of an abstract concept, but it was like, I want to keep investing in projects that I'm proud of more so than focusing on the business side, because I see the long-term leverage of here. And I very quickly was aware of like the guys, there was like a period where I was second shooting some weddings and just meeting the guys who are, 45 and they're like, oh, I really envy this work you're doing, but like I have a wife and kids and I just have to run this business now. And so I think there was this awareness for me that's like, I don't want to do that. And so like I have zero overhead. I have zero stakes right now. Like we're just going to play high stakes poker and bet everything on every project, because the goal is really to sort of like get out of this strata and to hit another level. I don't want to be doing this like one man band videographer thing. I don't want to get stuck in corporate world. I don't want to get stuck in wedding world. And so I think that was an intentional decision. Some of the other stuff was like, it was a combination of factors. Like, to be totally honest, there was a point where like narrative, I didn't like the idea of narrative because it felt like a lot of time and not a lot of money. And I just wasn't into it enough to be like, oh, I'm going to get paid like a quarter of what I would otherwise and then go sign up to do like 5 weeks on this thing. So just from like a lifestyle perspective, it was sort of like, I don't really see myself playing that game long term. And I've done a few feature docs on the DP side. Actually, relatively early. I mean, that's where like doors just started opening. I did something for our church, which led to a camp, and then like the camp was related to this sort of nonprofit in Haiti. And so like 6 months after I got my camera, I had someone be like, hey, can we fly you to Haiti for 2 weeks? And we're just going to pay for your whole trip and see what you can make. And that's the kind of thing where like I wasn't getting paid for that. I was just doing it, pro bono sort of thing. But that led to like, I went to Ghana for 2 weeks for a feature documentary on child trafficking there, which never came out. I've worked on a few. There is a, what's his name? A Pittsburgh Pirates baseball player who died. It'll come to me later. But anyway, I was working on a feature doc about him right before COVID. That's the last project that I did before COVID sort of shut everything down. That's not out yet, but is in process. I shot an interview for a Ferrari documentary that's coming out at some point. But I enjoy feature docs. I would like to do more of that kind of thing. I have always found that like the dance with some of that work is that it can be very all consuming, and that can be like a double-edged sword because there's a lot of opportunity to really flesh something out. But there's also a world where it's like, okay, we're going to Italy for 40 days now, and this is just all we're doing, you know? And so I sort of scratched that itch with like, I'm going to go to Iceland for like 10 days or Chile for whatever, but it was a little more condensed where I had enough family stuff and relationship stuff. And, Mandy and I started dating, and then I was 21 when I got married. So there were definitely calls where like I got a call to go to China for 3 weeks or something for some big music thing. And it was like right around Thanksgiving. And if I was single, I honestly probably would have done it, but it was just like, I'm not going to China for 3 weeks over Thanksgiving, So there was definitely some of those forks in the road that just kept pushing me more back into like shorter term, high leverage things, I guess is what I would say, where it was like, okay, we can still be creative. We can play at a high level, and it's not going to eat up like months of my life at a time.
So do you ever, like, was there any moment though when you felt like you were in the big leagues? Like, this is an amateur hour. Like there's actually people here to like get us coffee or stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think like there are like a few just like specific moments. Like I definitely remember just like even starting to work with ACs, which was a thing that I didn't do for a long time. It was one of I think sort of like my value propositions was that I was such a Swiss Army knife that I was like, oh, I can like DP and pull my own focus and like manage batteries and media, which is like something that at that level people don't do. Like people don't even pull their own focus. And so production was like, oh, that's great. We can like save money on an AC or whatever else. But then when I would have ACs, it was almost like, it was just shocking that like a director would call cut and someone would just come like take the camera and it would disappear and come back. And you're like, that's weird. But other than that, I mean, I think that like the day that I was on set, a friend of mine hit me up and was like, hey, would you be interested in like opping sort of second unit shooting on this tech thing that I'm doing? And I was like, yeah. It was like outside New York City, and I had to sign an NDA, and it was one of those like, it was vague. And I was like, it's just like, your antenna starts turning on. You're like, this is something interesting, but I can't know what it is until. And I get the call sheet, and it's an Apple commercial. And just like being on set for an Apple thing was one of those things, right? You're like, oh, this is like legit. And there's like 2 producers from Apple sitting in a 15-pass van taking notes on a monitor of, they're like overnighting hard drives back with all these notes that say like 12/21/52 kid smiles, 12/51/97 mom laughs, whatever else. It's such a well-oiled machine. And that was also the first job that I ever showed up to, that they were hiring me, camera, all this stuff. I get up really early, drive down to New York, show up, I'm so excited. And the producer's like, okay, yeah, it's looking like we probably won't need B-cam today, so you can just like hang out in your car. And I was like, they're like, we'll call you if you need you. And I was like, can I do something? And they're like, no, you're like, your job is to do your job, and we don't need your job necessarily. You're just here as insurance. And I was like, I'm just going to go. I made friends with the gaffer and just started like running stingers and hanging out. But like, that was also just a weird moment, is like, oh, we're spending whatever it was, like $2,500, $3,000 for me to be here for the day, just in case. Like, the insurance level has now exceeded my old level of execution, you know?
Yeah.
And so that sort of thing, or like I did a Walmart thing in Ohio, and just being in the world where it's like, oh, we need a PA to go get a bike helmet that is carried by a Walmart. Like, there's all this weird just machinery of logistics going on. And then the biggest thing that I got to do from like a cinematography perspective was this West Virginia Lotto campaign. My friend Jason Adams was directing it, and it was like $250,000, I think. But it was like, we were filming a bunch of stuff in a convenience store, and they were building out basically this like old abandoned convenience store. And so we're going to fly you down for a tech scout. And so you're going to come in for the day. You're going to look at the convenience store with all the keys, and it's like sort of just like bombed out, rotted out. And we're going to talk through lighting, blocking, whatever else. You're going to leave. Art department's going to go crazy. You're going to come back in 2 weeks, and it's going to be a beautiful store that's all set up exactly how you want it. And I was like, okay, getting flown in for a tech scout's a new thing for me. You know, come in, take our scout pictures, whatever, leave, come back. And it's like a pristine thing, but it's like we were able to replace all the bulbs in the ceiling with, bulbs that are the color temperature we want. We were able to like hide baby pins up under the drop ceiling so that we could just like pop the drop ceiling and throw lights up onto them. And then I got there and was like looking at the cashier, because it's a bunch of cashier interactions. And I was like, I'm a little worried about, it was like sort of a tannish wall. And I was like, I'm a little worried about like contrast with the talent and the skin tone. Is there anything, can we like put like a poster up there or something? I'm talking to one of the art guys. Mm-hmm. It's like, we can just paint the wall. And I was like, oh, this is different again. Like, we're at a different level where like now you can just paint things because it's all ours. And so they just come in and they're like, what color do you want the wall to be? And it's like, it's a little bit like God mode. Like, you hit the point where like my job is now, instead of moving things, I sit at a monitor and I call shots. And I go like, that has to go there. That light needs to be there. We need a 12 by soft grid right there. We need, whatever else. Camera's going to go this way. And you're just shot calling. Mm-hmm. And that, anytime that I got to play that game, it felt like such a different world from like these one-shot music videos of me running around with an artist all day and a camera in my hands. It was like, oh, this is just, it's surreal sort of to be like, we need Christmas presents back there. We need this person to be wearing red. We need, you just sort of start, it's like this very different free-flowing creativity thing that's incredibly proactive, where so much of my background is incredibly reactive and just making the most of whatever's there. And so that is a very long answer. But I think those were the moments that were more than anything just like, I never even conceptualized this when I got into this, just this amount of control and influence and being able to sort of like make things what you want them to be.
Yeah, man, I'm sensing a theme as people rise up in whatever avenue it is. You do less of the thing that got you there and you do more people managing. Like, how much of that job was like being a good leader and communicating what you want to people in a way that they don't think you're an ass and they actually want to hustle for you and work for you. Did you ever like think about that? Like, maybe if I read a leadership book, that will help me be a better DP.
Yeah, I think for me, the hardest thing, the biggest thing that I ran into in that season was needing to be more firm with people sometimes. Especially, it was pretty common that I would run into situations where, I'm 23, 24, 25, and your keys are like 40 or 50-year-old union guys. And a lot of them were super cool. Some of them were not. And so like even that lotto thing, to be totally honest, it was like we came in and I have always like, I have this little speech that I generally start any project like that with, which is like, I'm really excited to be working with you guys. I'm real big on all hands on deck and ideas. And so if you have a better way to do something, I want to know about it. I'm not stuck on my way of doing things. I know that the buck falls with me and it's my responsibility to have a plan and get us through this. And I'm going to do that, but I'm open to everything. And I feel like that sets just like a good stage, because some people are very just like, we're going to do it my way or the highway. And some guys are very like, I have no clue what I'm doing. You guys figure it out. And I've always wanted to just sort of be clear about that. But I've definitely had some guys who are like, we shouldn't do it your way. We should do it this way. And I've been to a fault like, okay, I'm open to trying your way. And so like that initial convenience store setup, I remember it just like wasn't coming together. And we got to the point where the director's like, hey, like we need to roll soon. And I had to go to the gaffer and be like, basically, fuck this. We're doing what I originally said, did that. And it was like perfect in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it was just one of those things that I'm like, sometimes I got to just like own the leadership role here, right? Like this is my job to know what I'm doing, and I have to speak up for the right thing and fight for what's right. So I was almost like over collaborative sometimes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it definitely is a lot more conceptual and high level and less hands-on and tangible. How does that theme play into hockey?
You know what? I think one of my faults as a player was the soft skill part of it all. Especially like when I was in junior in Mississauga in the Ontario Hockey League, I was in a leadership position, but there was a very clear hierarchy at that level. It's basically by age, right? The older players, the younger players follow the older players. So I felt confident in my place because it was a very obvious place to be. So I had confidence to speak up in the room and give, guidance or deliver a speech and stuff like that. And my final year, I was made captain. So it was like awesome to have that level of responsibility at a high level of hockey. But then once I got to pro, it's not that I lost all those leadership qualities. Like I was very unvocal. I didn't say two words in the room. Because I felt like they're like, hey, that's a good hockey player there. That's a good hockey player there. Like when you get to pro, you're no longer the best player. Well, most of the time, you're no longer the best player on the team, which you probably would have been all the way up to that moment. Now you're on a team with the collection of these players who used to be the best player on their team their whole life. Right. So I always just felt like a little bit intimidated, or like I didn't want to step on any toes. And I honestly, like looking back on my whole hockey journey, I think I held myself back in that way. Let others, take the, let their voices be heard. I'm big on as well, like too many chefs in the kitchen is not a good thing. Like you can look around, there's 5 other guys that like to give speeches. Like I'll just be quiet, So I think that slowed me down a little bit in my pro career. In like, it's a skill, those types of leadership things, they're soft skills. And now in my work, I'm relearning them as I have people that I'm starting to manage now as my company grows, and, even just managing clients, like finding the confidence or just giving yourself permission to be the authority. So, and I think you need that as a business owner. You are the authority. Your client hires you because you're the authority. And if you're second guessing yourself, or you're not confident in the vision or what should be done, now they're questioning, did they make a good investment with their money? Should they be paying you? So these are all things I'm learning as I go, but it does feel liberating to, I'll speak for myself, just give myself permission to be heard and just speak from the heart and be authentic and tell the truth. And there's really, nothing to fear.
Yeah, dude, I feel that. It's funny because, we've talked about this a little bit with myself and my own sort of getting in my own way with sharing things recently. But I was talking to this guy on Instagram earlier, this other super talented DP, but he was talking about black diffusions, like black silks, and sort of this thing where he was like, I don't understand. This doesn't do anything, basically. Like it's just a net. And so I went and explained like why it's not just a net. And it was just this really funny thing that as I was going back and listening to my voice memo, because it's incredibly nerdy, right? Like it has to do with like source size and apparent sources versus knocking down light from an existing source and how that affects inverse square law. And it's just stupid, nerdy light stuff. But it was just one of those weird moments where I was like, oh, I still really know all this stuff. You know, it's like that weird moment of like, you feel the magic wand again, that you're like, oh, I do have a certain level of like mastery of this thing that I take for granted. And I think for me, I'll speak for myself, there's a tendency to feel like that stuff is just like less, like there's not that many people interested in it, right? It's like the internet now is so lowest common denominator content where it's like, what's the thing that everyone's going to look for? How do you make your webcam look good? That it's like talking about the nuances of different forms of diffusion and how apparent light source sizes affect quality on objects is like, But yeah, there's a ton of value in being able to speak up for yourself and advocate for yourself. And that's another thing that I definitely would say towards the tail end of that period of my career. I think I started sitting back a little, and I had, the confounding factor of sort of like my dramatic public life explosion that I think conflated a lot of things in that state. But I think I just started seeing like the people around me start to get signed and go to these big agencies and do bigger things. And I was like, oh, these are the people I've been talking to. These are the people I'm in like podcasts with. We're in the same circle. Like this is just going to happen. I'm sort of going to get like magnetized in by the gravity of it all. But there is a reality there of playing the game a little bit, of just like whether it's getting dinners with people or having conversations, hopping on phone calls. And I had always tended more towards the mindset of like, I'm just going to let my work speak for itself. And I think there's a lot of value in that in a world where a lot of people just talk a big game and can't back it up. But even to this point in time, I find myself still having to go like, no, I need to advocate for myself. Cause like the work is the work, but if no one knows about it, it's not doing you any good. And so being able to take that state of, like you're saying, whether it's speaking up in the locker room, going and talking to the people you need to talk to, like there's that thing from the Kanye doc where he does the verse with Jay-Z, and Jay-Z says like, closed mouths don't get fed. And I think about that a lot. Like, I think that is something that I've just been reflecting on, even going to this next period of life of like, we need to speak up more about what we're looking for here.
Yeah. And there's a way to do it that's not so like ultra aggressive. That's just you're speaking because you actually want to help people. You want to teach people and help them along the path that you've blazed for them. And just to back up to what you were saying about the super heavy technical light stuff, like that's not for the common person, but there is people who need that information. I do video work, and I feel like I plateaued in my skill set. And the next thing for me is lighting. Like, let's start playing around with lighting, start learning how to get the best possible image out of my camera. And there's a science behind it, and I'm finding it hard to understand. So I think if there's a way for like someone like yourself who could be like a light guru and communicate these things in a way that like a child can understand, like that, like teaching, that's very important, right? In teaching, it's one thing to use, a bunch of $20 words and sound very articulate and smart for yourself, but like, is the message being communicated clearly? And I think there's always going to be a message or there's always going to be value for people if you can communicate higher level thoughts in a simple way. And lighting is super technical. Right. So like, I've told you multiple times, like, dude, you got to get on YouTube and teach your wealth of knowledge, these stories you have experience. Like, don't worry about the people who are in your circle. Teach the people who are like me or like you 5-6 years ago. Because those are the people like thirsty for that type of knowledge.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's totally a good call. And it's something that I empathize with, to be honest, because like coming into this space, it was stuff that all entirely overwhelmed me. And it is, I think my perspective is that it's generally explained in a lot of ways that don't really make sense. Like, it's just too abstract and ungrounded. Where there are simple ways of explaining it that sometimes require like a funny diagram or a silly analogy to get you there. But for me, it starts to click. And yeah, those are some of the things that I've been like, this probably would be helpful. Cause like one of the classic arguments to devolve for a second is people get into this question of like, does a light get softer when you move it further or closer? And I used to have this argument with other film people. And the simple answer to that question is that the light appears softer the larger the light appears to the thing that it's hitting. And so my funny little metaphor for this is if you imagine a mountain, you have a mountain, you're on the side of the mountain somewhere. You're on one face of this little peak. And you have a sun during the day. There's a very defined point where you would cross the edge of that mountain and you can't see the sun anymore. And you could move your head and you can go, now I can see the sun, now I can't see the sun. Now I can see the sun, now I can't see the sun. That gap and how big it is, which is based on if you think about the size of the source and the appearance of it to you, is what determines the perceived hardness of the shadow. It's a very sharp delineation between yes or no. So now if you suddenly have a cloudy day, maybe the sun is on one side and it's brighter on that side, but as you walk around the mountain, it's going to slowly get darker, but you're not going to have this sudden drop off to just like, and now it's black. And that apparent size that's created by, in this model, cloud cover is the thing that creates the perception of wrap around something. And so it's like, for me, that was something that just started to make sense, that it's like, oh, so, if we're thinking about nose shadows or whatever it is, we're really thinking about wrapping. And as the thing gets closer to me, it appears bigger. If it gets closer and gets smaller, it's not going to get softer. Like there's another game here, but it's all about how it appears to the thing that it's hitting. And so you just have to take the perspective of that thing. And now it starts to make a little more sense. That the smaller it is, the sharper, even the micro contours of pores on your face. If you have a really small thing skipping across, there's a part of your pore that can't see it. There's a part of your pore that can see it. The part that can see it's going to be really bright. The part that can't is going to be really dark. You suddenly bring that around and that dynamic is going to change. But like no one explains it like that. They just talk about it in like really heady physics terms that don't make any sense to anyone.
Yeah, that was still a tough explanation. Like I needed simplified even more, but I didn't know it was a discussion in the filmmaker world. I thought it was fact that if it's closer.
Oh, it is fact. It's just a commonly misunderstood fact.
Okay. So you guys are real nerds, eh? This is the kind of stuff you debate when you reach the
real nerds. Yeah. Well, this was the other conversation I almost got into with that guy, is because there's a second layer of it that is so it's like size of the source creates apparent softness. But another thing that I have felt anecdotally, I've never seen this explained in a scientific way, but to me it makes sense, is that light scatter becomes a thing. So if you imagine that you have like a bunch of beams, like you're just drawing straight lines and everything's going in one straight line, then in that world, even if you have a source that's say like a foot wide, all these beams are going in one line. Now, if you change the diffusion quality so that each point is bouncing across, instead of just going in a straight line, it's shooting beams out at all different angles. That difference between like a mesh of overlapping triangles is going to land differently on the subject than just a bunch of straight parallel beams are. And so that's one of these other things that's a nuanced quality of light thing when you get into like different fabrics and things, is how is it not only making the light source appear bigger or smaller or dimmer or whatever else, but how is it changing the scatter dynamic of the actual like photons emitted from the thing?
Yeah.
But that's like X Games conversations that you don't need. You can shoot movies and never talk about any of that, which is part of why I'm like, we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I know I can understand and appreciate there's a high level technical understanding. And I have this debate with my film crew I have here in St. John. We'll debate because at the end of the day, like, does anyone notice? Like, do people notice, or is it just the connoisseurs or the film, the hardcore film people who notice these things? What do you honestly think?
There's a little bit of. I think it's both. I think So there's two things there. The one side of that coin is like, I heard an interview with Dave Grohl where he said like, I don't know any music theory. I just play what sounds good. And I think that is a good thing to come back to in any of these conversations. That's like, skills and knowledge can allow you to express things that otherwise you would maybe have difficulty expressing, or executing things that you wouldn't know how to execute otherwise. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to ideas, And so if you have good ideas and you have fluency in your ability to like execute those ideas, then all the technical stuff doesn't matter. You don't have to be Mozart to be a really successful musician. You don't have to be a photon nerd to shoot really beautiful photos or videos. Like it's not necessary. The other side of that I'm inclined to agree with is that this is it is an art, it is a craft, it is a personal form of expression, and it's not just a greatest efficiency thing. I heard someone talking about this recently in the world of like, oh, well, you can do everything with samples with music now. And he was like, yeah, but we're not like selling insurance. Like we don't have to. If you want to get the snare drum that you really like just do it that way, And I think that's the both are true side of it. That's like, if you want to make content with just a GoPro and that does what you want it to do, it is 100% as valid as anything else in the world. If you want to be Greg Fraser shooting Dune 2 and like obsess about everything, that's totally a valid world. And wherever you are happy and executing on the thing that interests you and makes you passionate, you will surround yourself hopefully with other people who share that. And so like, I think both are true. If there's a world where like for me, I really do care about some of the nuanced stuff. And there are times that operating with people who are like, none of this matters, no one can tell, is just frustrating for me. It's sort of wet blanketing on the like, I want to be an artist thing. But there's also times that like people will ask me like, oh, should I get this lens or this lens for my like Instagram content? Like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't like your talking is the important part of this,
Right.
So I think it's a both is true situation.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. Yeah, I tend to side, like I don't watch movies anymore. I was talking to my friend about this, like don't really watch movies anymore. My main source of content is YouTube. So I tend to view the world through that lens. And one of my favorite YouTubers, back to GIFs, Van Neistat, you might have heard of Casey Neistat. It's his brother. He has a really good video on gift giving, to circle back to the start of this chat. But his storytelling is just so insane. The filmmaking side of it, like the DP side of it, the image quality side of it is like borderline horrendous, but the story is so good that you don't pay attention to that. You're just so hooked into the story. So I don't know. It's interesting. I guess finding a balance is key.
Well, and I think just finding your own voice, like for me, there's an element of like, part of the reason that I backed out of commercial cinematography a bit was that I realized that I really love making beautiful images in the service of what to me feels like emotional and impactful content, whatever that may be, whether it's me teaching or, a documentary about my buddy Dennis who got stabbed or whatever else it may be, an artistic music video. It's like, it has to be in service of something. And I found that for myself and like my soul, I couldn't just make pretty pictures and then hate the thing at the end of the day. That wasn't a fun game for me. And so, there are some people who their minds are incredibly complex, story structure, prose, to go to music. It's like you have people who are like lyrical geniuses that are just on so next level, like, MCs who are saying things that you're like, this is all a quadruple entendre.
Yeah.
And then you have people who really sit in the pocket of like beats and maybe it's not even lyrical at all. And it's like, both are totally valid again, And so like, I think to me, it's just a question of like, what resonates to you, and anything that supports what resonates to you. You could Van Neistat could probably collaborate with someone who's an insane cinematographer, and they would make something totally different, which Van Neistat may or may not like, because maybe that's a fundamental part of his thing. It reminds me of who's the designer? Is it Tom Sachs?
Yeah, the artist.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love Tom Sachs.
That it's like, I feel like chaos is just a part of his vibe, right? Like it's not. It's a little bit duct tape and Sharpie, and that's part of him. It's not like a McLaren or something.
Right.
And so both are valid. And I think that's, for me at least, something that I've always felt, but I've sort of wanted to bring back into the conversation, because it can become so like codex, lenses, storytelling, like everyone's arguing about what the best thing is. Mm-hmm. And it's like, guys, this is kind of a false dichotomy. You know, like you can have Kanye West and you can have whoever else, and you can have Dylan Francis and you can have Taylor Swift and you can have like this. Just make whatever makes you happy, you know? Yeah. And I think, at least for me, a lot of those conversations come out of a place of feeling like I have to validate my decisions, that it's like, oh, I'm insecure that I don't really care about the super high-end production thing, and so I have to say that it's unnecessary. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it is unnecessary, but you also don't have to defend that. You know, like it just is what it is. Just love the thing that you're making.
Yeah, totally. That's a great point. Yeah, Tom Sachs. I'm a big fan of Tom Sachs, and I just implemented at my company. We're actually just doing a rebrand, but required watching is 10 Bullets from Tom Sachs, one of his short films about his studio rules. Yeah, and another, he has t-shirts. They say it won't fail because of me. And that's like one of our company's mottos. We adopted that as well. So shout out to Tom Sachs, and also shout out to Dennis, by the way. Stayed with me in Germany when I was playing there.
Yeah. Gotta love Dennis. He's off being like a professional vagabond in Chicago now, which is hilarious. Mm-hmm. But okay, so we've gone down this whole thing. I feel like there's so many things we could talk about. Maybe we'll just have to do this again. But one thing that maybe is too big a rabbit hole to open, though I'm not in a massive rush, is that I just was curious to unpack for you. I wasn't expecting to talk so much, like the transition from hockey to what you're doing now, and sort of like the experiential side of that, the identity side of that, the loss of purpose, picking a new thing side of that. Because it's something that really resonates with me in my journey and going through those seasons. And my sense is that a lot of people in the world are going through versions of those seasons right now, and just sort of going like, what do I do now? Mm-hmm. And so, so you make it to the American Hockey League, you're a big star, you get to be captain, you know, you get to go play with the Rangers, and then what?
I was in my third or fourth season. So after I signed with the Rangers, I went to camp, had a phenomenal camp, was sent down to Hartford to start the year. And I had this, I did a video series about this actually on my YouTube channel, but I had this swagger to me. And I had this attitude of like, you finally, you worked so hard, you got this contract. Now they're going to see, now they're going to give you power play time. Now they're going to like, you know, the world is your oyster now. And I lost that sandpaper that I played with. And the season just, it was terrible. Wasn't playing to my full potential. Team was struggling. And I was traded to the Red Wings organization. I was assigned to Grand Rapids. Finished out the season. But that next year, I was signed a 2-year contract with the Rangers. And that second year, now I'm in Detroit system, I break my arm, humerus. You can see the scar. It was actually bugging me today. It's sore. And yeah, things changed after that because it was my contract year, 20 games left in the season, broke my humerus. So my NHL journey took a big hit, big hit. So now I had to start at the bottom, try to get that NHL contract again. Teams were not picking up the phone basically because no one knew if I was going to be able to play again. So I ended up going back to Hartford and signing just an American League contract. Went to training camp. Didn't even sign a contract. I went to training camp and earned a spot because a couple guys, one guy got picked up on waivers, another guy blew out his knee, and the spot was birthed. It's like the universe just looking out for me. So I got this job in Hartford, sort of a second stab, but it was more the same. I wasn't playing very much, and I could just see the window had closed. I was like, okay, well, that's it. I'm going to Europe. So I went to Europe, and my mindset towards hockey was different. Up until that point, it was like you're chasing, you're chasing a definite goal. Like everything I did was try to get me closer to being a full-time NHL player. But when you go to Europe, like there is none of that. It's like, okay, how much longer can I play hockey? Basically, I'm going to
Right.
use this to take me around the world. So in Europe, there's a November break. It's a week off. Like all the leagues throughout Europe, they get this November break. The seasons are shorter, less games, like half the amount of games. So, I mean, you go there, they give you a car, they give you an apartment, everything. Your money is tax free, so you're making euros net. So you're doing okay. Living in a different country, like there's a lot of things to be grateful for. It's not just the hockey. You're experiencing new cultures, and any chance you get, with these breaks that I mentioned, like, I was jetting everywhere. Went to, I went to Israel. I went to Greece. I don't know, England. Like I've been to 28 countries. I'm just trying to think of some of the ones that I went to on this November break. But that was it. I just tried to keep playing the game for as long as I could and live abroad and try to bank some money for when I was done playing. But it eventually came to a point where I wasn't fulfilled. Like I wasn't satisfied. I was just kind of like, I want to try something new. I was getting tired of meeting people in hostels or summer in Toronto, and people are like, hey, like, what do you do for a living? Oh, I play professional hockey. And they go, oh, wow, cool. Now you're the hockey guy. Like I hated that because I have so many other interests that are way more fun to talk about than hockey. So I felt like I was just typecasted in a way, and it drove me nuts. So towards the end of my career, I'm like, I want to redefine myself. I want to do something that I never thought in a million years I could do. I wanted a new challenge. At the time, a good friend of mine was a web developer. The new term, the 2023 and beyond term now, is a software engineer. So basically, programmer, writing web applications. So he was, I think, at the time, like working from home. Like the trajectory for pay is big in that industry. So I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I can travel. I work off my computer. I learned to code, went to a coding boot camp, and it was all about just like trying to do this thing that I never thought I could do. Like I've been an athlete my whole life. So it's just that stereotype. Oh, you're a jock. You're not smart. You can't do intellectual things. But now I'm learning to code. No one I know learned, they probably could do it if they really knew what it was, but it just seemed like this impossible feat. But I was proud to do it, and I was excited for the challenge, and I did it. I got a job at a startup in Toronto working as a software developer, and that went on for a while, like through COVID. But I was in this profession where I was like, I don't love this, that I did the challenge. I proved to myself I can do it. And I was kind of like, now what? I was becoming irritable, like around my family, just because I didn't have peace in my heart, So yeah, we moved out to New Brunswick, and I was unemployed for a little bit. I was doing freelance work, videography work. I was building websites for people, just not taking business really seriously, just kind of like floating by and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Just really, really struggling with no purpose. So I've always been into self-development, and I feel really grateful that I had this maybe wider perspective. Like I knew all about mindfulness and meditation and doing all these different spiritual practices to like ground me and keep me focused on like what is really important, or else it would have been like very, very dark. And I know a lot of athletes struggle with this type of thing. And it was just taking a long time. Like I was saying yes to everything. Any opportunity that came my way, I said yes, yeah, I'll try that out. Let's do it. And it took basically 4 years of saying yes to everything until I'm just arriving at a place where I feel like amazing and really happy with the direction that I'm going. I'm just trusting, sort of set my sights on a goal and a lifestyle, and just trusting that it will come together if I focus and dedicate myself to it. And it's happening. It's happening. It's all unfolding now. Some opportunities that I never would have imagined 2 years ago are, I'm working with these companies now. So yeah, it's when you take that leap of faith, it's scary. It really is scary. But if you trust and you're serious about it with the right, the right knowledge, it could be quite the beautiful journey.
I love that. I feel like you kind of glossed over the part though, where you're like on the cusp of getting the NHL dream and you get your arm freaking blown apart.
Yeah.
Like what was that like? Like I feel like you have this just like Zen but like there has to have been a moment where you're just like, what the fuck just happened? Right? Like there's gotta be some element of like watching it materialize and then just slip between your fingers a little bit. I don't know. I don't want to over dramatize it, but like what was that like?
No, you're totally right. Like I went home that summer and I'm on the phone with my agent, like, hey, what's going on? Like, where am I going to go? It's the first time I had that scare, like hockey could be done. Like there's no teams. Like, what are you going to do? And I was still going to the gym training, but it's always, I'm training at like 80% because my mind is just going in a million different directions. And I never had anyone to talk to. I never had anyone.
So how does that work? Sorry to cut you off, but like, so you get hurt during a game, right? You got like checked into the boards or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so your arm gets jacked. So then you get cut. Like, how does that work? I don't even know with like the contracts and stuff being injured. Like what happens at that point?
So it happened at the end of the year. So you stay on the team and you get paid and you see the doctors and do rehab and everything. But like we're at the end of the season. So as soon as the end of the season happens, like players go home like 2-3 days after. So Jess and I packed up the apartment. I'm driving the moving truck home with one arm. My arm is in a sling. And it happened in Michigan. So the workers' comp in Michigan is actually, well, I don't know if it's still like this, probably is, but it was really shitty. So if I got hurt in New York State, I would have been probably a millionaire. But in Michigan, I guess it's not a wealthy state. I don't know. You probably know more about that than me, but it wasn't very good. Yeah. So I didn't receive any compensation or anything, but you get, medical stuff. Everything is insured through the team. So like I wasn't out of pocket or anything. It was just like my rehab was paid for back in Canada. I just sent in the receipt. So everything was okay there. I was taken care of, but it's just like, and where do I get my future money from? Which was the issue. But in terms of like the dream evaporating out of my hands, like, I felt that going home and training, just not. I remember one day specifically training at the gym and just really struggling mentally. And I took this baseball bat and we had this giant tire, the tire you flip. And I just like beat the hell out of this tire and just totally freaked out, threw the bat down and just walked out of the gym. And that was probably my lowest point. And I had no one to talk to really, no mentors. You have my parents, my family, or, my girlfriend at the time, wife now. Everyone is very supportive, but no one understood what it's like to be in this situation. Mm-hmm. I had no one who was evolved in a sense, in a spiritual sense, that can say like, just trust the journey. Just only worry about things that are within your control. Like I don't control who's picking up the phone. The only thing that I control in this situation is how I prepare so that when I do get the opportunity, I'm ready. Literally not a single soul to give me that type of advice. The advice that I would give this is my more evolved self talking to my younger self. Just keep going, keep going. It's all going to work out. Just be ready because the time's going to come, so make sure you're ready. But it was tough. And it's still tough to this day to know that it ended. The dream ended because of me and no other reason. The ability, my playing ability was there. I could have played in the NHL, no question. It was up here that ruined it for me. And that's a tough pill to swallow. Taking my foot off the gas pedal, showing up, having a good camp, and then going down to Hartford and just having that little bit of swagger to me in a bad way. Just not cool. That's a tough thing to swallow still to this day. It's still part of my work is just accepting it, coming to peace with it, and trusting and knowing that it was part of something bigger. It was part of my evolution. So it was tough and it still is tough, but I know it. I know I can say this truthfully. It was part of my evolution, and I wouldn't be the person that I am right now, a person that I really truly love in my heart. That's an important thing, to love yourself, and I really do. So, yeah, that was my journey.
Yeah. I feel that, man. I so empathize with that. In my microcosm of that, of just like getting to the cusp of feeling like I was about to finally like blow up and be at this place that I wanted. And then I think the weird thing for me about my version of that experience was like, I feel like it's one thing when something gets taken away from you and it sort of feels out of your hands. Like I was training for a 50 miler with some friends, this ultra marathon, and I was training for it for like 2 years. And was like feeling really good about it. And long story short, 2 days out from the race, I'm like getting ready to go head up with my friends to go check in, and Mandy tests positive for COVID. And we like had this whole conversation where I was like, I'm technically negative, like I could still go. I just got retested, but it was early enough in the whole COVID thing that we were like, I don't know how she's going to be, and I don't want to be running around a mountain in New York if things get rough. And I just remember we went for a walk, and I ended up sitting on the porch and talking to her about it. And I like, it was like a deep grieving, weeping thing for me. It was just, for me, I don't know about your experience with the hockey thing, but it was like, I put all the work in, and I'm never going to get to actually see, like, I don't ever get this moment back. Even if I retrain and do it later, this thing just is never going to happen now. And to have it that close to you and then just watch it disappear from out of your hands is like, so it was such a frustrating experience for me. But on the more like professional public side, earlier than that, it was sort of, I had this moment of like, I either get divorced, move to LA, become just like film hotshot solo guy in LA, or I shut everything down online, take a month off work, pump the brakes on everything, go to therapy, get in shape, whatever else. And for me, the hard thing about that in hindsight was like the feeling of almost like killing your own baby with it. That it was like, I felt like I had put so much energy into building this thing, into climbing out of this life circumstance I had been, into building a film community, into teaching, into having this career. And it wasn't taken from me. It was like I had to go and flip life support off on all these things, And in some ways, I prefer that to losing it out of your control. But I think that was one of the experiences that for me, to the point of just like not having anyone to talk to about it, it was like, it was a very lonely period of being like, because I think, again, I don't, like for me, that world was sort of very disconnected from my day-to-day world. And so people, like most people that I know, don't even understand what I do. Like they don't understand the like sit at a monitor shot calling thing. They don't understand any of that. And so it's like this very different world where you're just operating at a very high level, and maybe that's taking jets and playing hockey, but you're this guy. And then to just sort of like get that hacked out, and then you're sort of plopped back into normal everyday reality. And it's just like that, for me, that disconnect in my heart, and not knowing how to talk about that at all, without feeling like I was somehow being ungrateful or demeaning to other experiences or anything else. But for me, it was just this real felt sense of loss that's like, man, I just love playing at that level with people who love to play at that level. And that's where, for myself in my journey, I felt like, I agree that it's like, I think I had to take that diversion, and it's been very much for the best in so many ways for me. But I've been coming to a point where it's like the one brightest shining star in the whole like pick a new direction to aim for thing has been like, I just want to play with people who want to play for real again. Like I don't even care what game we're playing, but that's the thing that I miss the most, is feeling like you're a part of something where everyone's playing for real. And I am someone who doesn't do well in a space where we're sort of resigning ourselves to the like people aren't going to notice things, so we can just sort of phone it in. And that's the attitude that's been the hardest for me in like the post-COVID world of working more locally, is just being like, there's nothing that makes me more depressed than when I get a call that's like, we don't even have to try. We just have to make something better than the last horrible thing that they got.
Mm-hmm.
And I just hate that. It's like, that's the thing that I would just like
Mm-hmm.
wage war on that concept.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's tough when you don't have anyone to talk to. Just that period of, I feel like there's so much spiritual and philosophical writing on the concept of like the value of processing those things alone, but there's still a part of me that would like to think that there's a world where people can have community when they go through those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I could argue for both sides, but I think to endure those struggles solo, I am starting to believe it may appear solo, but there's something higher guiding you through that, because you could easily, like I've been through it, you've been through it. We could have easily spiraled out of control into a very dark place, but that didn't happen. I don't believe that's an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, what I'm realizing now, what I'm seeing, and this is what I picked up from reading a bit about Buddhism. I like to study different religions. Not that Buddhism is a religion per se, but suffering, what you're describing as suffering, what I describe as like the hockey dream dissolving out of my hand, out of my grasp, that it's only suffering because I'm clinging to that story or that path.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't cling to anything and you just be in the moment and accept what is happening when it's happening, there's never suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, applying that, embodying that, and applying that in life, it's liberating. I'm noticing it now, you know, in my work dealing with clients, and I'm pursuing business and growing my company in the same way that I was pursuing chasing the NHL. So now there's clients coming in and out, and some are like really cool, and it's like, oh, I would love to get that, but if I don't, it's like I'm not going to lose sleep over it. It wasn't meant to be. I'm not going to attach myself to that. You know, I'm doing me. I'm on a path. I have a vision. I'm going to enjoy this journey. Because like, haven't you ever thought, like, reflecting back on your film career, you get to a really high place, but the high place, it's when you get there, it's kind of like, yeah, like, okay, like this is cool. It's all the stories that led. Yeah, exactly. It's all the stories along the way that make it so fulfilling and that give you joy. Right. So like it's a full-time job to stay in that headspace that I want more. Yes, I'm pursuing more, but like, this is the fun part right here. This is the fun part. Like, think of that every single day. So easier said than done.
I totally agree. I think that's one of the things that I feel like is the biggest blessing of all of that, is that when it's your whole world and you lose it, it feels really painful, and it is traumatic in a way, right? But I think there's an element to me of the lesson of the impermanence, the lesson of not clinging, while holding on to the ability to, let's say, like, to aspire. Because I think there's a point, at least for me in the last few years that I went through, that's like, you're just going to lose everything, so just why even try? You know, like that thing can come in. Mm-hmm. But what I have found, even in the creative process, is that I believe that the best work is in many ways born out of play, and playing like there's no stakes. And that when everyone starts playing like the stakes are really high, the stuff gets worse. I don't know if hockey's like that. I've never played a pro sport, but I think there's an element of, to use like a financial example, it's like, to play at a certain level, you have to be okay with losing $1 million sometimes. Like, that's just a part of the game, you know?
Yes.
And I feel like for me, that's the biggest thing that I've taken out of all of those experiences, is the ability to ground myself, the ability to stay in the moment, the ability to
in many ways keep the eyes on the prize, but to not get totally unraveled when things go sideways, because I do want to live in a future where I'm playing really big games with really big people, and the stakes are going to be much higher. And there are going to be moments that are probably more catastrophic than any of this was.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a skill in being able to be okay in the midst of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally it. And it is the same in professional sports, by the way. You'll see it at every level. Coaches have told it to my teams 100 times. You're playing in big games, but it's like, guys, I just delivered the speech, but just go out there and have fun. Just have fun. And you'll see it in the NHL Stanley Cup finals, like game 7, like the most tense moment for any hockey player. And the coaches, they all say the same thing. Guys, just enjoy this, because win or lose, this moment you may never get again. You probably will never get this moment again. So just be there and take it all in. Yeah, it takes work though. Like, this is one thing that most people listening would go, "Oh yeah, I know that," but to embody that in your life, that's another level. And most people are not there. They're not there.
Right.
So,
well, it's an experiential thing, I think, right? Like it's a thing to grasp onto as a concept, but whether it's the hockey example, playing even the difference between playing in a professional arena versus playing in high school or something, and just the ability to be seen trying in that place, the ability to carry the weight and perception of all of that, I think is it's such an under-respected thing in such a like spectator heavy world that we have. Like I think about it even when people say half-handed things about musical artists or whatever, mumble rappers, whatever else. And it's like, if I gave you a microphone and put you on stage in front of 100,000 people, you would be a puddle in 10 seconds. Mm-hmm. If you had to talk about something that you're an absolute expert on, if there's any element of like silliness or self-expression of this, you would become so self-conscious that you would be useless. Mm-hmm. And the ability to flow in the presence of the pressure, the ability to think clearly, knowing that every hour here costs $20,000, the ability to come up against that and remain calm and present, I personally believe is way more important in a lot of ways than any of the technical knowledge really is. Like the technical knowledge is all in service of your ability to do that, but that's the key skill to performing at a high level in just about anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You spawned a thought when you were just talking there. When I was in Germany, I had this insight playing hockey there. The coaches at the start of the season, we're in a video meeting. He is screaming at us, "You guys, F this, F that, blah, blah, blah. What are you doing there?" And I'm thinking, and the guys are like, we all have sour faces on. I'm like putting on a sour face because everybody else is, because that's what you're supposed to do when you lose a game. Pretend you're upset. Yeah. At this point in my life, I'm like, guys, why are we upset? We play hockey for a living. Like, give yourself a shake right now. There's people like going to war right now somewhere on the globe. And yeah, that was, I don't know why that just popped into my mind, but just like to not take it so seriously, but also be in like, flow state. Yeah. Flow state is great. Like I know it's a thing in sports, but is there flow state in filmmaking?
Oh, 100%. That's like, I think that's in many ways for me, I think that's the like shot calling thing or whatever else. It comes up in other places. Like when I did the Chandler Smith CrossFit documentary, like there's moments, but it's like that that level of where you're just executing. You're not really thinking. You're not really, I don't know, you're not overly analyzing anything. It's just flow. that is the magic state to me, and it totally happens on film sets, whether it's DPing or directing or whatever else, where it's like all of a sudden the day just went by, and you're like, oh, we just magically did all of that somehow. Like it almost feels like, I don't want to say an out of body experience, but it's almost like you're just watching it. It's like, it's just magic. Your body knows what to do. Everyone knows where to go. Especially when you're in a world with a team who is a well-oiled machine. You start getting to the world of where like people on your team are solving problems before you've even identified them. I think that's one of the other interesting things about, like you mentioned, like there's the leadership piece of like you're doing more people managing, but then there's also a point where your crew gets so good that you're just getting out of the way a lot of the times, that it's like, oh, these guys know how to do this part even better than I do. And so I'm just sort of like creating the container and providing some shape and, making sure everything's orchestrated and running well. But like, this guy knows how to light a car way better than I do. And so I'm just going to let him do his thing. And it's the most, I don't know why that's like the most satisfying feeling in the world. Like, I feel like you've researched all this stuff a lot more than I have. Like, why is that the thing that we long for?
What specifically?
Like that, just that being in flow, that like perfect match of like challenge and fluency.
Well, it's a meditative state. Like that's what meditation really is. It's just being present in this moment. It's actually very difficult to do, and it's hard to replicate, like getting into the flow state that you talked about. It's not like you can just say to yourself, oh, I'm going to be in flow state. Like, let's do this. There's something that happens. I'm not sure how it works in your world and mine in the hockey world, or what once was my hockey world. It took something happening. Like I would score a goal maybe early in the game, and that would just like, boom, my confidence would shoot up, or, I'd block a big shot and all my teammates would go like, yeah. And the coach would give me an extra shift. And, you stack a few of these confidence building, moments, and then all of a sudden it happens. And then it's like your mind and your body are separate. You're not thinking anymore. A lot of pro sports, it's all mental. It's all mental. The top elite players to the bottom of the totem pole, in terms of ability, like they're neck and neck. Everyone could shoot the puck hard. Everyone could skate. Everyone could hit, whatever. It's confidence and it's flow state that separate the best from the average and below. But there's tools that you can do. There's breathing, it's meditation. Later in my career, I was telling you about this last time we spoke. It's microdosing, which I believe is going to be, it's going to be inevitable in sports. It's going to creep in if it hasn't already. I'm sure it has, but it's going to become more public, more talked about. Because for me, I started microdosing my last at least 2 seasons, and I was instant flow state as soon as I hit the ice. Like puck drop, boom, I'm in it. All the mental chatter gone.
Yeah, I find that that phenomenon, because I've had a few moments of that where it's like, for me, there's this perfect tipping point of, it almost feels like, I would describe it as you're like downplaying brain chatter just enough. And sometimes like substances and stuff help you hit that line. But there's always like, say it's like alcohol. It's like when I used to play video games, it's like there's this like 1.5 beer line where I get nasty at Call of Duty, and then I quickly fall back off the other side, and you're like, now I'm just like incapacitated a little bit. But I experienced it a while ago, even with we had friends over and we were playing ping pong, and someone had a weed pen, and I just got the perfect hit of a weed pen to where I was like totally, like I felt like I was in the Matrix, like where it feels like I would describe it as like, it feels like your awareness is almost like ahead of the action.
Yeah.
To where you're like, I see the ball coming, and now my body is moving to hit the ball, but my eyes are already going to where the ball's going. Yes. And like, then you're just perfectly dropping it there. And you're like, that separation where you're ahead of the moment.
Yeah.
I'm always curious if there's more levels to that. Like, is Messi at an even farther ahead point than I've ever hit,
Yeah. I wonder that too. I honestly wonder that too. Like the high-end athletes, I don't know. There definitely is something special about them. But yeah, like you're describing like I'm just picturing games where I felt it. Like I'm back in Hartford in the XL Center, and just those moments where like your grandma, my aunt's in the
Yeah.
crowd, and Sean, like they've seen me hit those flow states, and I'm sure they could tell like, oh yeah, he's in it tonight. Like he's shown up. And then there's other games where you
Yeah.
just can't, or other times in life where you just can't get out of your own way mentally. It's like the self doubt, the chit chatter. What do people think about me? It's a heavy energy to burden, and it slows you
Mm.
down. When you're in flow state, you're light, you know, you're
Hmm.
very light, flowy.
Are there any practices outside of the sort of microdosing and substance of worlds that you've found helpful for entering those kinds of states?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spiritual practice. I've been talking to my friends a lot about spiritual practice, and it a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at this. They just don't understand it. If you want to feel your best, you have to have some type of I'll drop the word spiritual practice. I'll call it self-development practice. Um,
Mm-hmm.
mental health awareness is mainstream now, right? It's more common to talk about our emotions, how we're feeling, especially as men, and rightfully so. We should be talking about these things and not burying our emotions, because we're all suffering. There's a lot of suffering. We're
Mm-hmm.
all going through it. Like, let's acknowledge that, please.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to transcend that suffering, there's practices that people have been doing since the beginning of time. This knowledge is just there.
Mm-hmm.
Myself personally started meditating in 2016. Headspace, started using that app, Headspace. It's like super mainstream app. Like I think LeBron is part of it, or he might be part of the other one. Calm.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I started doing that 10-minute meditation. I felt an immediate increase in my well-being, that sense of lightness. It was there. I was like, wow, this is
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I started doing it twice a day. It was a little bit choppy for probably 3-4 years. 2020, 2020, 2021, started doing daily meditation. So meditated every single day for a few years now. Yeah, it's been life-changing for me. Other things, journaling. Been journaling every day for almost 2 years. Started doing yoga every morning. First thing I do, get out of bed, brush my teeth, light the wood stove get the fire going, do yoga, 40 minutes. These types of things, it's work. It's work, man.
Mm-hmm.
But it's mental practice. It's like training. Like an athlete goes to the gym and they train in their craft to be the best athlete. These things are well-being training. That's what they are. That's
Mm-hmm.
what spiritual practice, that's what self-development practice is. It's practice. You show up
Mm-hmm.
and you practice, in your mental state, your sense of well-being, your ability to tap into flow state. It's all within reach. It's all there. You fall into flow state a lot
Mm-hmm.
easier. You're happier. You feel better. You're more authentic. Truth starts to rise to the surface. All these things. So when
Mm-hmm.
I talk about it openly now because I'm doing it, I feel amazing. Things are happening in my life. People are coming into my life that weren't there, who are bringing value, like yourself. So if someone wants to roll their eyes and be like, this hippie new age person, it's like, cool, man, cool, you do you. But yeah, we'll
Yeah.
be here. Yeah, and we're having fun, man. We're living.
Yeah. 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 I love that. I've had a very similar set of experiences. I think the thing that's been most interesting to me as someone who was like initially very skeptical was again experiencing sort of like the interconnectedness or like levels of some of these things, um, with emotions, with the body, with thinking, with our state of being. And so like I've talked about it a bit on social media intermittently, but like um, I've found that like visualization is something
Yeah.
that I've been very weak at for a very long time. And I've just been getting to the point where like I'm starting to have very like vivid ability to visualize things in like meditative states. And I think at first, I was starting off and I did Headspace and I was like, I don't know what the point of me just sitting here with my eyes closed is for 10 minutes. It's like the voice in your head is just really raging against it. And then slowly it's like over time, it gets quieter. You get the ability to observe and distance yourself. And then for me, it started last year in flashes. It scared the hell out of me the first few times it started happening, that like I fully almost like disassociated from the voice and was then able to perceive like visual things and different things in my inner world. Was like, what is this? What's going on? Like, it was a very terrifying moment for I don't know whether you'd say my ego or whatever else, but just this awareness of something else being in there and starting this like relationship with my subconscious. But in many ways, it's like, it feels like that pot of gold that you didn't realize existed, where like now when it comes to problem solving or thinking or being creative, it's like, oh, I have this whole little like toolkit that I never used to have. I'm not stuck on this just like surface level choppy water thinking. Like, there's a clearer place in here that is not only clearer, but like more complex, more vivid than like most of my surface level thinking is. And the connection between that and the physical and emotional states. Like, even last night, Mandy and I were doing some stuff, and dude, I've had an issue with my right hip on and off for a while, but I was just like digging into my like psoas on the right side, and doing some breath work with it. And Mandy was helping me a little bit. And it's one of those things that I have personally learned the power of just like going into the emotion of those places and just like letting it out. And I just start crying, and, it's almost these like vivid memories. All of these things start flashing by, but I can literally feel like my body finally relaxing in those moments. And that's one of those things that, I feel like I came to this very like, oh, that's so woo woo and weird. Like, your emotions don't have anything to do with your muscles, and, tough it out. And it's like, I don't know, man. Once you start experiencing it, it's like it's undeniable. I can't totally explain it. I don't have a perfect mechanism for why that is the way it is. But as someone who's done it, it's real, and it affects my ability to be athletic. It affects my ability to show up day to day. Like, all of these little things do affect my ability to be me and exist in the world. It's not all just some like worshiping the monkey god in the hope that my Lambo shows up in my door or something. Like, it's a very experiential process for me.
Yeah. That's what like New Age spirituality gets kind of characterized as the secret. Like, just think of $1 million and someone will give you $1 million tomorrow. It's not that, but there is a mindset towards it. And it's one of those things, like, if people can't have it proved to them through science, then they don't believe it. So reason for that, just reading this book right now, is talking about it. So for like the beginning of man, we went immediately right into superstition and religion to explain the material world. And it was like that for a long time, until science came along and said, well, no, it's for this reason. So humankind was totally betrayed by spirituality or by the church per se. And now we've totally embodied the scientific way. We only believe something is real if it can be proven, but science has its limitations right now. It's always growing and evolving. And that sort of limits what we will maybe like accept as possible. Like, what if we just opened our minds up a little bit more to like the things that can't be explained or proven yet? Like, what if they are true? Just take a little sliver of that and approach it with an open mind. And there's tons of different case studies and research that just have like really interesting findings. I was reading one, they had two groups of people, like one who actually like did bicep curls and their biceps grew. But then there was another group that just visualized themselves doing bicep curls 3 sets of 10, like a few times a day. And their biceps grew as well, like paraphrasing the study. But it's like, how do you explain these things? I'm not totally closing my mind to it. I'm just like, wow, that's really interesting. Like,
yeah, there's another study like that was fascinating to me, was a cycling study on time to exhaustion in athletes, where they were doing like 10 or 20 minute like FTP, high threshold efforts to exhaustion. And it was under, I don't know if I already said, but it was under heat. It was like a sauna environment. And the variable that they messed with was positive versus negative internal self-talk, and had a measurable physiological difference in blood lactate levels, time to exhaustion. Like your body literally operates differently depending on how you're thinking.
Yes.
Which is such like it's such a basic concept, and is like, to what you were saying about so much like Eastern teaching and stuff, like fundamental. But I feel like at some point the West went through this like mind body separation and was just like, no, they're two totally separate things that we can just look at in totally isolated ways. And it's like, okay, I'm not saying that you can like think yourself into being an eagle, but it does have more implication than just closing your eyes and willing yourself through all your trauma and whatever else and letting all your negative voices tear you apart and then hoping that somehow you're going to be great at the end of it all.
Yeah. It's like, how do you explain? Okay, so to a person who's totally closed to the metaphysical, the very materialistic, science-driven person, if you're into spiral dynamics, stage orange, I think you'd really enjoy the human development model called spiral dynamics, by the way. Check that out. But a scientific-minded person would be stage orange. How do you explain metaphysical concepts to somebody who is just so rational and logical? Like, where do you begin? Is it a book, a documentary? Like, is it even possible? Will to open their minds just a little bit, do they have to come to that on their own?
In many ways, I feel like you do sort of have to come to it on your own. I think it's like one of the great, to me, like flaws of like evangelical culture is this idea of like intellectually introducing people to ideas that are going to save them. I think there is an element of sharing about experiences, and even in the world we're in now, as more and more people are more openly having these conversations about their personal experiences without fear of being burned at the stake or decapitated or anything else. I think there's a little bit more openness and just curiosity around those things. But I mean, like conceptually, I'm trying to think of like what the most like high leverage concept is that could crack that door. I think for me, like one of the concepts that sort of broke my brain and opened me up a little bit was just thinking about how everything that you experience, you're experiencing in your mind generally.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of like, I don't see the pen, I'm interpreting something that my eyes took in as data, and I'm projecting the idea of the pen, and I'm connecting that with data from my fingers, and just like really taking time to like contemplate that and everything that made me uncomfortable about it. And then even contemplating the idea of sort of like automatic and semi-conscious processes and the intelligence and awareness of sort of the body's ability to generate itself and then regenerate itself, and then going like, what are the variables that influence, like, why is your body ability to make teeth one time and not the other time? And in many ways, I feel like that's just like it sounds like a very high thought, but those sorts of thoughts of going like, what is the real connection between what I call matter and what I experience as my mind? And how do those two things, what are the true limits of how those things interact? Even to the point about how does the thing that I experience as the voice in my head affect the way my body produces blood lactate, because it's not all just probability charts anymore. In many ways, it put me in a mild existential crisis for a while, because I was like, science isn't real. Everything's just thoughts. Like, you can't chart any of this stuff. Is anything healthy or unhealthy? Is it all just what we think about it? But I feel like I've been coming back to a place now of finding the integration of both, But yeah, it's like for me, it was just facing a lot of facts that made me really uncomfortable, which is like another one is the Ghrelin study on smoothies that was like, if you tell people it's an unhealthy smoothie, their body reacts to it differently despite it having the same things in it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. It also, to be honest though, the biggest consequence that I found from that unexpected consequence is it made me very contemplative around the things that are said in general and the things that are said in the like marketing space, especially, and the consequences of what you tell people. And I guess a real sense of like stewardship and responsibility of the power of words in that way, and the power of how the way someone perceives something affects how their body receives it, the power of all of these things, and going like, oh, this is no longer just like a funny intellectual game that we're playing to sell things. Like these words do have the power to affect people's fundamental experience of reality. And that still overwhelms me a little bit sometimes when I think about it too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that they're at the highest levels, marketers are aware of this and they're using it to their advantage? I'm just thinking for this is like a dystopian view, but like, is McDonald's like their top people sitting at a round table? Like, oh, how do we trick these people into thinking like this is healthy food? Or is that to,
I don't know. I mean, that's like, I tend to skew optimistic in that my experience is that the people who are at a level of consciousness to be aware of that tend to have integrity in how they use it.
yeah, I'm with
And
you.
I think that most misintent is born out of ignorance. But yeah, I mean, there is a reality that there's tons of people who I see it all the time, even on just like social media. That's like, here's my 8 dark psychology marketing tips. And like, that's the kind of stuff that like, I don't know. I believe in karma, I guess. And I think there's a world where a lot of people don't, and they think that this is just their one go and it's get as much juice as you can out of the orange by any means necessary. And that's their journey. But like, I'm not a big fan of the like dark arts of marketing personally, because it's a game that I know that I'm very capable of playing, but it's a game that I would not enjoy being played on me. And so I don't really have any interest in playing it on other people.
Yeah, man, it's a fine line. It's a very fine line, because that's what marketing is in sales. It's convincing someone to buy a product or service. Like, how do you do this with words? It's very tricky to do with integrity, but it is possible. And yeah, I'm learning marketing and sales and stuff. It's part of my sort of evolution after hockey, applying these skills to business and giving my permission to sell myself. And I'm recognizing, or I'm becoming aware of these tactics, which I'm seeing like, oh, wow, like I've had that happen to me, and I've maybe bought the thing or did whatever. I fell for these, I don't want to use the word traps, but tactics. And now it's like, yeah, if I want to sell my service, I have to use them, but in a way that there's integrity there, in a way that if you're actually delivering a lot of value, then it's not manipulation. Like it's ethical. If you're doing an amazing job and the product is good and you do good work, then yeah, then it doesn't seem icky to me.
Yeah, I feel like I agree. I think there's a difference between like a honest explanation and helping people sort through options and coercion. One of the great like sales people that I've talked to has said that like sales actually has nothing to do with convincing anyone about anything. It's just about laying out the options, and hopefully if you've laid out the options correctly, the decision should be obvious. I tend to view it more from that perspective, which is where it can be very tough in a world where you haven't put yourself in a position to have a lot of control over the other elements of the process, because you don't have any control over the product. You don't have any control over the service being fulfilled. You just get the job of making it look as compelling as you possibly can, whether or not that really is compelling, which is part of where and it's an ideal, but I think there's a value in saying like, no, I want to work with things that I want to connect people to. It's like, it's such a simple distinction, but to me, it's the difference between, I'm happy to talk about the tools that I use and happen to have an affiliate link. I'm not just going to go find every affiliate link I can and schlep it out across the internet as this is a thing you should buy. And for me, that's just a personal integrity thing about like, would I use this? Do I feel like this is a good solution or not? But I think there is this idea that is very, it feels very solidified in like the modern internet marketing panopticon lately, which is that like our job is to leverage people's physiology and psychology to create as much leverage as possible to coerce them into deciding to buy our thing. And that means that we can take advantage of all the things that cause them to feel pain, all the things that cause them to feel insecure, all the things that we can do. To me, it feels very just like, I don't know, calling a girl ugly and then asking her out on a date. Like it's this weird, like sort of like manipulative thing. And I think the thing that I personally feel is that like, you just don't have to do that. Like there's so many different ways that you can present something, that you can tell a story, that you can show someone something, that you can have confidence in the voice and the vision and the brand and the reasons for the decision, that like you don't have to twist people's arms. And that's where like using all the tools at our disposal to communicate clearly and articulately in a way that pulls people into experiences, communities, and products that reflect their highest aspirations and desires, to me is the goal. And the minute that it turns into how do I Indian burn you hard enough that you'll buy my shit, is like, we've lost the plot. I can't get behind that personally. And that's some people's hustle, and that's fine. But like, to me, there's a distinction between manipulating people into pushing checkout and communicating a thesis that says, this is what we value, this is what you may value, this is how we fit the thing that you value in your journey of becoming the version of you that you want to be.
Yes.
And here are some of the pains you may have experienced. Here are the frustrations that come in that journey. Here's how we can help you on that journey. That's a different thing.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. But I'll ask you this question. Like you've done a lot of different gigs. Has there been any gig that you've taken that, that you question the morality and ethics of, like a commercial that you made for a product that you're just like a diet pill or something like that? Have you ever? And is there a price where you would kind of find a way to justify making a commercial for a diet pill or something like that? Like, honestly, is there a price where you would be like, you know what? Fuck it. Morality out the window. That's a lot of money. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, so I would quickly zoom back, not to punt the question, but I was listening years ago. It was probably 9 years ago now, 8-9 years ago. I was in Texas for this event called Masters Motion. And I remember this was still when I was very new, but I was sitting around these directors who were having this conversation. And it was in regards to, one of them was getting hired to do like Super Bowl Walmart commercials. And he was basically like, I literally am torn on like, I think it was Walmart. It was something like that. But it was like, do I literally take the money that's about this thing that I totally disagree with and just like dump the money into the counter cause? Just like take the money and dump it into a nonprofit or something, or invest it, do whatever else. Do I say no to the job on principle? And it's an interesting question. It's like, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I have really disagreed with. Honestly, the closest thing I've come to personally to that is probably, there was a while where I was on a string of like political commercials, like regional political commercials. And it wasn't so much that like any of the specific politicians or causes, like one thing was about pensions in Ohio, and it was some, you know, super PAC that was running these ads about pension problems and corruption. And it was sort of over my pay grade. I was like, I just don't know enough about this to know if I agree with it or not. And I do think there's an element of like being a contractor that's like, I'm here to nail boards together. I'm not here to, you know, have an opinion on the way the house is designed. But for me, the part of that that was the most soul sucking was the obsession with the agency on having finger pointing be a part of the narrative. So like in this specific example, it was something where they were like, the script was something like, for years, our children have been promised, you know, X, Y, and Z resources, yada, yada, yada. But politicians have failed them. And it was like a 30 and the script ended up being like 36 seconds long. And me and the director were both like, you just cut the politicians have failed us. And the agency is like, but they have to know who the problem is. And I was just like, this is everything I hate about this, like just the finger pointing part of it. But I haven't like gotten called to do anything that I was like super personally, ethically against. So I think like that's the closest thing to that. On the other side, I guess it depends on what it was, right? Like if I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, like if whatever if the border agency is like, we want you to make a anti-Mexican video, here's $1 million, I'd probably be like, I'll just pass, you know?
What if it was 5 million?
You know, there comes a point where color, as we've said, it's not a conversation.
Yeah. See, like it's an interesting topic though, because I think we're very good at justifying our behavior as humans. Like I like to really think honestly about these topics. Like, what would I do that? Is there a number like $10 million? Would I do like a racist commercial? Like, 10 million. Like
I have a funny story about this. I am not going to name names, but there's a very well-known, very artistic, sort of like, you know, you would say like creative liberal production company that does a lot of very high-end work that I've done some work with. And a few years ago we were on a job and we were just catching up, and I was talking to one of the guys who owns the company. I was like, you know, how have things been? And he's like, you know, it's been good. We've been doing just some like pay the bills work lately, doing all these silly Donald Trump campaign ads, but he's never going to win, so it doesn't matter. And this was like 2015, and a few months later, I was like, you fucking guys. Like, but that stuff got buried so hard, you know, it's like they're out here doing basically like Drake music videos and stuff. And they're like, we didn't do any of that. Never happened. So I don't know. I don't, what I would say is that like, at the end of the day, I don't hold it against anyone to find a way to put food on their table. And in everyone's personal journey and personal preferences, you know, there was a period in my life where I would have said that like having, like doing a hip hop music video with more scantily clad women was an ethical problem for me. And like at this point, it's probably not. And so like, I think there's a lot of just like personal stuff in there. If ISIS called me to film their next like execution of an American prisoner, I'm probably going to pass. But that's where like it's a personal thing at the end of the day. There are people who are going to make scammy internet ads, you know, all the way down to true scams. There's people who that's their whole hustle. Like that's a thing. And so like, and that's all. At the end of the day, to your point earlier, it's like just out of my control. And I think for me, part of the centering aspect, even of like the last few months, has been almost putting the blinders onto that and being like, I just can't be obsessed with that. Like, yes, there are people who play that game. I do not want to play that game. And I'm not going to sit here and longingly look at what my life could be if I played that game. You know, it's like sitting there and just like scrolling Dan Bilzerian's Instagram and being like, oh, if I was a billionaire with a yacht with 30 naked Playboy models on me all the time. And it's like, either do it or don't, but don't sit here and like fantasize about it, you know?
Yeah. You know what's funny? Like that may seem like a awesome lifestyle to a 16-year-old boy, but like that, I look at a person like that, I'm like, dude, that guy is suffering. If he's like, I don't know, he's older than me. I'm 37, so he's got to be into his 40s, and like that's what he's doing. I'm like, dude, come on, man. Like
Yeah.
I look at that, I'm like, yo, you're suffering, man. I know you're putting on this show,
Yeah.
but is that fulfilling? Maybe it is. Like, who am I to say? But my first thought is like, that's for like a 15-year-old.
Yeah. I think it's just different. I don't know. Like I do think I have a tendency to be, almost to my earlier point, like overly people pleasy and not having negative opinions on these sorts of things. But it's just like I so quickly get reminded of like when I was younger and like in church communities, and people would be like, people just like skateboard and like hang out on the beach and they don't have a retirement, and that must be such an unfulfilling life, and they don't have, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And it's like you can sit from any seat and look at any other seat and play that game, you know? And so like I'm inclined to agree with you. I'm inclined to agree with, you know, my personal opinion that dark psychology is not my preferred way to make connections with people. But there's a billion people doing a billion things, you know? And so like to me, honestly, like, again, I think the personal opinion is so valid, but I find that most of those thoughts, like the thought about the dark psychology thing, it comes back to the does the gear really matter thing. It's just like a getting too caught up in things that are out of my lane. You know, it's like if I don't care about it, I don't need to sit here and defend it and justify it and argue about it. And like just stay in my lane.
Totally. Yeah, I've been trying to focus on that a lot lately. Is just taking this chapter and just focusing on myself and my goals and saying no. Actually saying no is, you know, you hear that a lot. At least I've been hearing it a lot lately. Like it's a power to say no to someone. Hey, do you want to go meet up for a drink or like whatever? Just like, no, that means I'm not going to make a YouTube video. That means I'm not going to do some writing like I said I was going to do. That means I'm not going to finish this book, you know? And you might piss people off, but I'm at a place now where I just don't care. I'm so excited to be on my path. The people that I interact with, my circle, everyone it's curated, you know, it's curated in a selfish way. But I feel for this chapter, that's what I want. It's not going to be like that for forever, but for this chapter, as I'm, you know, in hot pursuit, that's the way it is.